welcome to our weekly markets review brought to you by SG Futures. Coming at you today on Sunday the 20th of December, so 5 days out from Christmas. This is part one of the video this week. We're going to really just have a brief overview of the E-mini S&P, and then our second video we will take a look at the DAX 30, which is the German 30 stock market. So as always, we're going to start on our E-mini S&P. This is our daily cash market in a candlestick format. And as we've come in this week, we have marked off just our each of these candles represents the daily RTH session. And as you see on Monday, we came in with a bit of a gap higher, and then we sold off, and we touched off the 20-day moving average, so that's still showing us support. Tuesday we had an overlapping session. Wednesday, a little bit of indecision, but we had mostly traded higher, and then Thursday really tight range, followed by Friday, which featured a pretty big sell-off, and then a massive rally right into the close, which was probably due to Tesla being added to the S&P. So there was a lot of business being done right into the close. To be honest, not a huge amount has actually changed this week. We are still sort of grinding higher, and there is good value to be buying support in and around the 20-day moving average. But one of the important levels that we've talked about quite a bit on the tweet machine this week is 36.20. Let me just mark that off in here. It's thereabouts. We touched off this and broke above it actually on the Thursday night Globex session. So in the overnight futures session, we broke above it, but on Friday we came a few ticks short of actually trading that particular level and testing it. So that will remain an area that we will keep a little bit of a tight focus on next week. Just to let you know, we are pretty much wrapped up for the holidays now. We typically don't trade in Christmas week, but it's something we know that you guys are probably keeping an eye on. So that's a level for us to potentially work off straight off the bat. And really it's going to be following the 20-day moving average as we move through into next week. Really, the sort of core things we take away from this week is we have just this continuation, and we try not to follow the news too much, but we have this enormous continuation of these rolling restrictions coming in around the coronavirus, and what seems to be just the complete opposite movement of the stock market in response to this. Typically, the stock market will price things 6 months out. So what it's telling us is that, you know, things are pretty much rosy in the garden at the moment. I do feel there's a good sell to come at some point, but at the moment we can only really trade what's in front of us. And if it keeps grinding higher, it keeps grinding higher, and we just gotta try and do our best in those types of conditions. So this week was, we've opened in the sort of lower half of the balance area for the week, and we've tested some lows, and going by our market profile auction theory, we've then rotated up and test the highs. So when we get into the actual market profile side of the video, we can start to explore a couple of levels in more detail. So looking at our E-mini S&P weekly market profile chart, so I'm going to mark off the actual week that was. So that is this week in here. So this entire TPO is the entire week's worth of trade that we had. So coming in this week, we've talked a little bit about in previous videos that we have a little bit of poor structure down in and around this sort of area down here, and we've always been, I feel like a parrot now at this stage talking about this level around the 3580s. Will we ever get back down here? It's a level that I think, if we get a decent sell-off, I think it's an area where you might see buyers potentially stepping in. So again, that's a level that we're going to carry forward. I don't think we get in there this week. I don't think there's enough news to really drive us down there, but never say never. But it is worthwhile noting that we've now had 3 consecutive weeks of overlapping value. So if we were to mark off each of the value areas, so from 3 weeks ago in here, and then the week before last in here, and then just last week, we've got our value in here. So the value is overlapping, and it's gradually migrating higher. So what that tells us is that there is acceptance of these higher prices. Ultimately, there's just a complete lack of sellers in this market, which is a whole different conversation entirely. What we've seen is, we will just mark it off in here. We have the fairest price to do business, which is the POC in here. The volume point of control for 3 weeks ago is here. It migrated gradually higher the week before last up here, and then this week we've had the point of control migrate up to 36.86. So that is telling us, it's giving us all of the clues. It's telling us that buyers and sellers are in agreement that prices are fair and acceptable in this particular gradual grind higher over the past 3 weeks as we run into the close of the year. So coming in next week, we will obviously be keeping an eye. We'll obviously be keeping an eye on the value area high for this week, which is 37.13-ish, and then the value area low, which is down here at 36.78. I think I marked it out before. So there's kind of two areas that we will look at. Any sort of break below these areas, and I would look at maybe if we had 2 or 3 consecutive days closing above or below, that's telling us that there's a value break and it's getting acceptance. So if we get prices breaking above the 37.20, for example, and then 2 or 3 days of trade in this area, open and close in this new area, that is telling us that it's acceptance. That's what we're looking out for this week. The same can be said for the downside. If we break below the 36.80 and we have a couple of days where we trade below this particular level, or we consolidate down below that particular level, that is again telling us that there is acceptance at lower prices. So they're the sort of nuances that we're looking out for coming into next week. When we look at things from a daily bird's eye view point of view, we can see that when we came in on Monday, we had this enormous gap higher, and we think we talked about on Friday, and we'll get into this in a minute when we just zoom right in on the market profile chart, but we had a poor high on Friday, which we expected to be repaired, and it definitely was on Monday when we came in. We opened up here, so we've opened with a huge gap, and this would be typical of a Sunday night. We'd see a pretty decent gap higher, and we opened up here. We explored some highs up here, but ultimately we closed down in here. What's interesting is where we closed on Monday corresponds to this particular high over here and this particular high over here. So why is this particular close over here important? Well, it corresponds to this particular set of TPOs over here, which could be said to be a balance area, and this is where we have value of pretty much overlapping over the course of a number of days. So this is acceptance of price within this particular range, and we had then the break higher, and the first time we explored into it we failed, which was on last Friday, the 11th of December. So we failed in our exploration down here, and we actually closed back above that value area. So that was significant, and we talked about that in last week's video, that we'd explored in here, we reverted back into that current week's weekly range. This particular box I have down here illustrates this a little bit further. So we had 3 days of overlapping value, and then we had the value break higher, and it's no coincidence that particular low in this value area over here is relatively close to this particular high over here. So again, it's telling us that this break higher has been accepted by buyers and sellers. So this close down here, we've had an exploration into this balance area over here, and it has failed, and we closed actually just marginally above it. That was a tell as we went into the close on Monday night that if we didn't see a further exploration in the futures overnight, and we didn't, it's very rare that you would close on lows like this and then continue to sell off unless there's probably a pretty big news event associated with it. It'd be rare that you would see that. So there's a pretty high probability immediately when we saw that close that we were going to probably open up higher the next day, and we were going to revert back into the previous week's range. And that's exactly what we did. So we've opened in here the following day, and we've had a little look below, and we've tagged the previous Friday's close, which again I think is significant. We'd been hoping to maybe get down to Monday's value area low for a proper test, but there's just a real absence of sellers in the market to take it down there. And we closed in the top half of the profile is in a bit of a P-shaped formation, which tells us that there is some shorts who we're just covering, and they're at maybe in horrible positions and they're just getting out. So that was telling us that particular accumulation happening up here is that's what's happening there. So we also had printed a poor high up here, which we'll talk about when we zoom in on it. And we then, immediately when we came in then on Wednesday, is telling us that there's a good chance that this is going to be repaired. So when we get into Wednesday then, we look at, we've opened well outside of value from Tuesday, and this is now a value break. So when we open outside of value, we have tested, I think we came 4 ticks below Tuesday's value area low. So that was actually a buy in there for us. Well, for me personally, I bought that in here. I think there was, I put a 2-handle stop on it, and it was one of my trades of the week, because it's a pretty binary trade to take. If it breaks lower and we start exploring into this value area from Tuesday, it tells us that prices aren't being accepted up here, and in actual fact we'll probably start targeting some lows down here. So it's a pretty high probability outcome. It'll mean that if you're wrong, you're going to be wrong quick, and hopefully you'll be wrong cheap at the same time. So that was one of the nuances that we took on Wednesday. We closed in the sort of middle of value. We closed above the volume point of control. Then on Thursday we had another gap higher, a value gap higher, and we've sort of consolidated pretty tight range in here on Thursday, and closed pretty much where we opened, which is the sort of indecision candle we saw on the previous chart. But then on Friday, what is interesting is in the overnight session we traded above 37.20. And I think we mentioned this on Twitter, is that we've broken above the 37.20 in Globex, but we'd like to see a retest during regular trading hours, and we didn't get it. And when A period opened, which was here, I think it was 37.15, the high up here, just there was absolutely zero follow through. We came off for pretty much the remainder of the day, albeit in M and N period, so the last 2 periods of the week, we rallied really hard on Tesla's inclusion into the S&P 500. So one of the nuances I really want to sort of note out here is there is a couple of areas I want to just mark off. So we have on Thursday, we have our value area low down here at sort of 37.07. And that also corresponds to the value area high from Friday. So it's thereabouts. It's within a few ticks either way. But it's telling us that when we opened on Friday, we sold off for the day. And granted, we closed inside Thursday's value, which is significant, but we've built out overlapping value to the downside. So this is sort of a fly in the ointment for the bull narrative. So if we're looking for bullish momentum to continue into next week, this is a little bit of an outlier when it comes to the pieces of information that we're looking at. If the Tesla inclusion into the S&P 500 hadn't have happened, would we have closed down here? And would this mean that potentially we're testing some lows down in and around in this sort of area here? We would say that that might actually be a potential for next week. So where we open on the Sunday night futures this evening, and B, where we open in the regular trading hours tomorrow afternoon, will tell us an awful lot about what direction the market may take. If we are to sell off in the overnight futures and we're to open in sort of this, if we're to open sort of below the 3700 mark, down below some key levels in here, which would be the sort of volume point of control from Friday, the volume point of control from Thursday. If we were to open down below that, so if we were to gap lower, and I believe 3680 to be a pretty important level, if we were to gap below these 3 levels and maybe open sort of down here somewhere, I think there's a good chance that we maybe start exploring into this particular area over here. So that would be a particular area of interest for me if I were trading next week. So they should be the first signals you look for as you pull up to the desk tomorrow. Let's have a look at how things look on a more zoomed in version of the profile. So we can see on, I will just mark this out that this is Monday. So we can see we have had the enormous gap higher. We've had an expiration higher and we've failed, and then in C period we've pretty much come off for the entire day, and we closed in M and N period in and around this area here. What's interesting is we look at the value area low from Friday, and we only came a couple of handles into the value area low and we failed. Now, we didn't take too much from that piece of information because M and N period can be pretty funny periods to trade sometimes, but it's telling us that there is failure in there, so that these prices aren't being supported. So if we were to mark off the value area low down here, so when we explored into that value area low, we only came, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So we only came 2 handles into the value area low before reversing and closing inside of Friday's value area, which, as we mentioned, is significant. So we mentioned that on when we come in on Tuesday that we had a significant gap higher, and that is fairly commonplace when we've closed on the lows, that you get an overnight inventory that's almost 100% net long, and that's what we got. And we closed up here and we opened up here, and we printed an initial balance above the previous Thursday's range. Then when we came off and we tested the lows, we only came, I think it was a handle and a half below the Friday close and the Friday VPOC. So again, it's another tell that there is no value in Friday's range, the previous Friday's range. So we're still getting confirmation that prices are likely to go higher. One of the things that was, again, a little bit of an outlier from an information point of view, from an MGI point of view, or market generated information point of view, is that the volume point of control was pretty much the same between Monday and Tuesday. So the fairest price to do business was at 36.59 on Tuesday, and it would have been 36.59 and a quarter the day before. So again, it's telling us that when we were coming in on Wednesday that we've had this huge move higher, and we've printed the poor high up here. We also have these single prints right in the middle of the profile in here, and we're immediately thinking that there's a good chance that overnight in the future session we're at least going to try and get down here and fill in some of these single prints, because this G period of singles is just emotion. That's just people hitting the buy button for whatever reason. It's broken above the initial balance, and the short's just trying to cover like crazy, and people just hitting the buy button. So we have the poor high that printed up here on Tuesday, and immediately when we're coming in on Wednesday, we're thinking that this is going to be repaired. So we initially explored lower during the future session overnight. We didn't get a huge push lower in the overnight futures, but we definitely believed that there was a good chance that we would repair this, and we got that in a period on Wednesday. We thought that there would be a further exploration of the single prints down here, so the G period single prints. That was one of the things we were looking at. We just didn't get the sellers come down to fill that out. What is interesting is that we had a pretty strong reversal, and I watched this on the ladder, and it was a little bit of a last minute trade for me, was that when we traded back down into Tuesday's value area, there was buyers who really stepped in here, and this was a trade I took, and I just put my usual 2-handle stop on this, so it's 8 ticks. I think my stop was sort of down here, this sort of area, 36.80, again a key level that we'd be working off, and this was pretty much my trade of the week, and I held this up until this value area, a tick below this value area high up here. So that was the sort of a tell, because we've rejected out of Tuesday's value area, and that there is then the anticipation that we're going to start looking at some highs. So then really over the rest of the week, we had the sort of indecision day on Thursday. In here we opened here and we closed here, so this was a doji candle, or an indecision candle. So we've explored down here, explored up here up to the 37.17 level, which we thought we would get a test of the 37.20. We didn't get it, and then overnight in the futures on Thursday night we had this break above, and we printed 37.23 in the futures and never got there on Friday. So that was immediately a tell that when we failed up here and we started to sell off, that we're going to start exploring some levels down here. And what we have down here is, it's not great excess in the L period down here, and I think this is again due to the Tesla stuff that was happening, but that is now a firm area of interest for me, and it corresponds to 3680, the 3680 level, that is just sort of in the back of our minds on this particular market. So I think there's an opportunity that we explore this set of lows down here again. We have these single prints to be filled in. Again, that would be another area of interest for us to look at. And I also believe we have a Virgin volume point of control down here at 36.59. I'm not saying we get down there this week, but again, it's 2 days of a VPOC, so it's a pretty strong VPOC, it's a pretty strong area that we may find support around over the course of this week. So really, as we come into next week, as I mentioned, we're not going to be trading ourselves. We are pretty much done and dusted until the first week of the new year. We'll try and get some content to you over the holidays, but otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Wish you all the best for the holiday period, and if you're trading next week, happy trading.